This afternoon, as our presiding brother has said, we are going to engage in a consideration for an hour or so, maybe two, who knows, to consider the topic, the signs of the times, which provide all of the evidence that the end is near. That is the end of Gentile rule, or the end of the kingdoms of men. And we will demonstrate from the scriptures this afternoon that in God's plan and purpose, the first phase of 6,000 years, we are most assuredly living in the last chapter, as it were. To start, I would like to turn to the gospel record of Matthew chapter 24, which we have on the screen here, where Christ's words makes it plain that we will never know the precise moment of his coming. He says, "But of that hour, of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only." Christ explicitly says to those of his day that of that day and hour knoweth no man. In Acts chapter 1 and verse 7, we read, "And he said unto them, It is not for you to know the times or the seasons which the Father hath put in his own power." And this, my friends, was in reply to the apostles' question as to whether he was to establish, to re-establish, to restore the ancient kingdom of Israel at that time. And the answer we have in verse 11, "Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus which is taken up from you into heaven shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven." When the disciples asked Jesus, "What shall be the sign of thy coming?" he didn't tell them that it was a question that was impossible to answer. He did indeed give them signs that would be seen in the world leading up to his return. Jesus would not have given these pointers unless he intended the generation just prior to his return to be able to broadly recognize that his servants were indeed living in the very last days. Every thinking man and woman should be deeply concerned at the evil conditions extant in the world today. The world, for most generations throughout history, have turned away from God. Man has always been evil. But perhaps the difference between the evil of today and the wickedness that prevailed, say, 50 or 100 years ago, is that today governments throughout the world have a new liberal agenda. The wishes of the minority are forced upon the wishes of the majority, whether they like it or not. Some refer to this as the New World Order. It is a new world order, my friends, of godlessness. The Communist Manifesto has achieved its goal. In scriptural language, it is every man doing that which is right in his own eyes, where everyone is supposed to be equal and everything is tolerated and accepted, where normal takes on a new meaning. That was the primary goal of the Communist Manifesto in the middle of the 1800s. It was to stretch the definition of normal to its utmost bounds. Take the subject of homosexuality. The Conservative government in the United Kingdom under the leadership of David Cameron never once mentioned same-sex marriage as part of their manifesto in their attempts to come to power during the last general election in the UK. Yet the legislation was rushed through the House of Commons and approved by a more conservative House of Lords and will be available to same-sex couples within months. And so, dear friends and young people, we would ask you to bear this point in mind as we proceed through our remarks. The governments of the world today are immoral. They are engineered to be immoral. Complete disunity characterizes international affairs and relationships. Nations are divided whichever way we want to look at things. They are not united at all. Immorality, pornography, permissiveness, drug addiction, etc. are all on the increase and are spiraling out of control. With the vast majority, the sanctity of marriage is no longer respected or regarded. Premarital relationships are the norm, and popular literature openly encourages the lowering of moral restraint. My own wife said to me a couple of years ago after walking past the newspaper stand in a local gas station that things have got so bad that just walking past the tabloid newspaper stand, you do not know where to look. National newspapers, even those considered conservative, are vulgar and base. And the boundaries each day are pushed out ever further. And yet these papers are bought in their millions with no shame at all. This, brethren and sisters, friends and young people, is what is feeding our sick society. In this era of frank same-sex education in schools, which in the UK now starts from the age of 5, divorce, child delinquency, and illegitimacy have never been higher. Discipline has broken down with the decline of family life, so that teenage students are concerned by mob hysteria manifested by violence. Even the universities, the very centre of reputed education, are noted for their complete lack of discipline and yobbish behaviour. And as you and I know, this list could go on and on. Paul, in his second letter to Timothy, in chapter 3, verse 2, says, in connection with the last days, that man would become proud and children would become disobedient to parents. This really is the blueprint for breaking down society in all its decent forms. Put kids on an equal footing with parents and guardians. Ban all forms of restraint. Sister Esther will tell you in the kindergarten she works at, you are no longer able to call a child naughty or use any negative language at all. If children are ill-disciplined, they grow up into unrestrained adults with blighting results upon society, which is so prevalent today. From a scriptural point of view, then, we ask this question: what are the scriptural signs of Christ's coming? Peter tells us that the time would come when events would decline and reach a point when people would ask themselves the question, where is the promise of his coming? 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 3 to 4, knowing this first, that there shall come in the last days scoffers, walking after their own lusts and saying, where is the promise of his coming? For since the fathers fell asleep, all things continue as they were from the beginning of creation. Now the verse really is applicable not to today directly, but to the last days of Judah's commonwealth, which terminated in their overthrow from the land of Israel in AD 70. But it paints a general picture for us of the conditions which will exist in the time of the end. Where is the promise of his coming? 2 Peter 3, verses 8 and 9. But, beloved, be not ignorant of this one thing, that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as one day. The Lord is not slack concerning his promise, as some men count slackness, but is long-suffering to usward, not willing that any should perish, but that all should come to repentance. The Lord indeed is not slack concerning his promises. And so we look around us in the world. The world, it would just seem, is drifting aimlessly out of control. In the Middle East area, we have gone from one war to the next just in the last 10 years. Iraq, Afghanistan, Lebanon, Syria. And Iran is just waiting for the opportunity of wiping out the nation of Israel and could strike to that end at any time. Will these bring an end to the world as we know it? Daniel 4, verse 32, "And they shall drive thee from men, and thy dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. They shall make thee to eat grass as oxen, and 7 times shall pass over thee, until thou know that the Most High ruleth in the kingdom of men, and giveth it to whomsoever he will." The Most High ruleth in the kingdoms of men. It is not out of control. And so that's the basis really upon which we would like to base our remarks this afternoon. No matter what goes on in the world, and no matter how far it declines, we must always remember that it is the Most High that ruleth in the kingdoms of men. God has a plan, and nothing with God is left to chance, not even war. A Christadelphian writer in the mid-1800s in relation to war says, "War is not displeasing to God any more than a rod is displeasing to him that uses it for correction. God instituted war when he put enmity between the serpent and the woman. It is a divine institution for the punishment of the transgressors of his law, and a most beneficent one too, for all the little liberty the world enjoys is attributable to the controversy of the tongue, the pen, and the sword." And a Christadelphian writer who lived in the same dispensation also wrote, a man by the name of Robert Roberts, he says, "In view of this, we are enabled to recognize a special providence in these political and military events that lead to changes in the governments of men. The movements of these governments stand related to the purpose he is working out in the earth. The execution of the program has been entrusted to his angelic hands. Consequently, the events of politics are not the haphazard operations of human whim, nor the chance achievement of human prowess. They are the results of carefully manipulated natural causes." Habakkuk 2, in relation to this appointed time. "For the vision is yet, says the prophet, for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry." And Daniel chapter 8:19, "And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation. For at the time appointed, the end shall be. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come." So no matter what the appearances may be, when we see the world drift into chaos, first of all we have to remember that it is the Most High that ruleth in the kingdoms of men. And secondly, we have to remember that the Most High has a plan with the earth, and there are no delays in the execution of the plan. "The vision tarrieth not, it shall surely come." In fact, God's plan centers absolutely around God himself. The salvation of mankind is secondary to that primary purpose, that the earth shall be filled with God's glory. That is the primary purpose. God manifestation, not human salvation. Glory to God on the earth. But God's glory is not established in the earth today in any broad sense at all. But it will be established at this appointed time. Daniel 8, verse 19, speaks, as we have just said, of this appointed time. In Acts 17, We read at verse 26, and hath made of one blood all nations of men for to dwell on all the face of the earth, and hath determined the times before appointed and the bounds of their habitation, that they should seek the Lord, if haply they might feel after him, and find him, though he be not far from every one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as certain also of your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. For as much then as we are the offspring of God, we ought not to think that the Godhead is like unto gold or silver or stone, graven by art and man's device. And the times of this ignorance God winked at, but now commandeth all men everywhere to repent, because he hath appointed a day, in the which he will judge the world in righteousness by that man whom he hath ordained, whereof he hath given assurance unto all men, in that he hath raised him from the dead. Thou shalt arise and have mercy upon Zion, for the time to favour her, yea, the set time is come. So this chaos that we are talking about is overlooked by the Most High today. It is winked at. God does not take any notice of it, as it were. But the winking will stop, because God has nominated a day in the which he will no longer ignore their evil actions, but will judge the world in righteousness by Christ Jesus. Psalm 102 verse 13, Thou shalt arise and have mercy upon Zion, for the time to favour her, yea, the set time is come. And this then gives us the reason why the apostles, after the resurrection of Christ, as he was about to ascend to his Father's right hand, asked him that question as to whether he was then to restore the kingdom to Israel. Because all of the Old Testament prophecies pointed to the time when Zion and Jerusalem and the nation of Israel would be glorified again. And to the disciples, they thought that that set time, the appointed time, was then. Yes, God has this appointed time. He has a plan. In this case, a plan to favour his chosen nation, Israel. And if that is the case, if God has this plan, shouldn't we too, those of us who are looking for salvation, shouldn't we be looking for that same time? 1 Thessalonians 5. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, verse 1, ye have no need that I write unto you. For yourselves know perfectly that the day of the Lord so cometh as a thief in the night. For when they shall say peace and safety, then sudden destruction cometh upon them, as travail upon a woman with child, and they shall not escape. But ye, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day should overtake you as a thief. Ye are all the children of light, and the children of the day. We are not of the night, nor of darkness. Therefore let us not sleep as do others, but let us watch and be sober. Let us, friends, not get confused over the peace and safety mentioned in this verse. They say peace and safety. It is a peace and safety cry. The world is not at peace when Christ returns. Rather, it will be in a state of chaos and war. To the world at large, when Christ Jesus returns to fulfill the prophecies which God in his plan and purpose has laid out, to the world at large that event cometh as a thief. He does not come to the household as a thief. They are watching and busy keeping their garments clean. Let us then be awake. Let us watch and be sober. Let us ensure that we don't fall asleep this afternoon, and so pick up the pages of our Bibles, if we can, to the prophecy of Daniel. And chapter 2. Daniel chapter 2 and verse 26. The king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, Art thou able to make known unto me the dream which I have seen and the interpretation thereof? Daniel answered in the presence of the king and said, The secret which the king hath demanded cannot the wise men, the astrologers, the magicians, the soothsayers show unto the king. But there is a God in heaven that revealeth secrets, and maketh known to the king Nebuchadnezzar what shall be in the latter days. Thy dream and the visions of thy head upon thy bed are these. As for thee, O king, thy thoughts came into thy mind upon thy bed, what should come to pass hereafter, and he that revealeth secrets maketh known to thee what shall come to pass. But as for me, this secret is not revealed to me for any wisdom that I have more than any living, but for their sakes that shall make known the interpretation to the king, and that thou mightest know the thoughts of thy heart. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form thereof was terrible. This image's head was of fine gold, his breast and his arms of silver, his belly and his thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof before the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field and the fowls of the heaven hath he given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. And after thee shall arise another kingdom, inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it of the strength of the iron, for as much as thou sawest the iron mixed with miry clay. And as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly broken. And whereas thou sawest iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. But they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. And in the days of these kings shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom, which shall never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter, and the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So from this we can see that from the first mention of a metallic colour, it was representative of a nation, because Daniel tells Nebuchadnezzar, Thou art this head of gold. It had reference, of course, to the Babylonian kingdom over which Nebuchadnezzar presided, and he was told that after thee shall arise another kingdom inferior to thee, and a third kingdom of brass, and the fourth shall be as strong as iron, and it shall break in pieces iron and clay. This is a prophecy of Daniel that spans over a period of 2,500 years, beginning just prior to 500 BC, then spanning a time period of 2,000 years after Christ. Many people focus in on the time periods involved, the start of the Medo-Persian Empire, the start of the Grecian Empire and the Roman Empire. But Brother Thomas in Elpis Israel says that what Nebuchadnezzar saw was a period of time, commencing with him and culminating in the establishment of God's kingdom. So the dream that Nebuchadnezzar had was a dream of 4 universal kingdoms, And the last one that we read of was a time period when it would not be as strong as the previous dominions. It is, young people and friends, it is in those days, the days which we are living in today, that the God of heaven shall establish his kingdom. And this is one of the signs of the times from a scriptural point of view. We are not living in Nebuchadnezzar's day. We are not living under the rule of the Medes and Persians. We are not living under the rule of Greece, nor in the days of Rome. We are living during the iron and clay time period when God has declared that he shall establish that kingdom which shall never be destroyed. And when we look to those European beast nations referred to by the 10 toes, we have seen visibly before our own eyes, in our own generation, just how broken they are. There is no adhesion binding them together. Greece is bankrupt. Ireland, that is the Republic of Ireland, is bankrupt. Portugal and Spain are not far behind. Europe is in utter chaos. I have a newspaper here, the Financial Times, that I picked up at the airport. And it shows that the rate of unemployment in Spain is currently 57%. So under the age of 25, if you're under the age of 25, living in Spain, 1 in 2 of you, essentially, will be unemployed. In Portugal, it's 40%. In Italy, it's 40%. In France, it's 24%. In Belgium, it's 24%. In the United Kingdom, it's 20%. And the list goes on and on. Europe, as we say, is in utter chaos, and the time is ripe for Russia, the Gogian invader, to conquer Europe. The second sign that we wish to talk about is the moral standing of the nations. We would like to have a look at several quotations in this respect. One of the most powerful ones is Joel 3. Because if we can align current events with prophecy, then we know where we are in God's timeline. Joel 3, proclaim ye this among the Gentiles, prepare war, wake up the mighty men, let all the men of war draw near, let them come up, beat your plowshares into swords and your pruning hooks into spears. Let the weak say, I am strong. Assemble yourselves and come, all ye nations, and gather yourselves together round about. Thither cause thy mighty ones to come down, O Lord. Let the nations be wakened and come up to the valley of Jehoshaphat, for there will I sit to judge all the nations round about. Put ye in the sickle, for the harvest is ripe. Come, get you down, for the press is full, the fats overflow, for their wickedness is great. Multitudes, multitudes in the valley of decision, for the day of the Lord is near in the valley of concision. This talks essentially about the nations coming to war, to Jerusalem and being cut off. Judging the nations is part of God's purpose, for their wickedness truly is great. The fats do indeed overflow, the press is full. If we were to ask the question, and relate it to our day, are the nations wicked today? What would our answer be? Well, we couldn't have wished for a better tie-in in light of all of the things going on in our country, of the number of corrupt MPs that have resigned over recent years over their personal expenses scandal. Even the people governing our country have been exposed. Some of those members of Parliament were asked to pay back literally tens of thousands of pounds in expenses that were claimed against the rules. These are the men and women running Great Britain. The nations are absolutely wicked from the top down. We all know of the things looking at the media, of the types of problems going on. Even Iran. Quite often in countries such as Iran, the Ayatollahs quite often announce who is going to succeed the position of president before the votes have even been counted. That's why God has a plan to establish a king that will rule on the basis of righteousness. Matthew 24, but of that day and hour knoweth no man, no, not the angels of heaven, but my Father only. But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. God's judgments in the days of Noah were poured out on a desperately wicked world. And as God destroyed that generation from their wickedness and corruption, so will it be in the days of Christ's return. Genesis chapter 6, verses 5 to 12, God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. Verse 11, the earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence. The earth was corrupt before God and filled with violence. All flesh had corrupted his way upon the earth. Does violence fill the earth today? Violence is so complicated today by all the various gangs, the cells, the units, that quite often in our country you will hear that the Met Police in London, that's the Metropolitan Police, have had to convene to consider specific strategies to overcome what is going on in London at any one moment in time. And that is just in Great Britain. It does not matter what age group we speak of. Murder is being committed by individuals as young as 10 and 11. Gruesome acts of violence. There was a case in the UK a couple of decades ago where an 11 and 12-year-old murdered a 2-year-old toddler. And the man in charge of the police investigation later said that he could not believe the depth of their evil. He said their minds were dark. Most of you will be aware that my own brother was murdered in January of this year. He was 45. It was the 9th of January, a dark winter's cold day. And just after 10 o'clock in the morning, our phone rang and my mum called to say that the police had just left their house to tell them that my brother Andrew had been murdered in the middle of the night. And so we went over to their place straight away. And unfortunately for us that day, the police work on the basis of actual factual information. So despite what they see on the surface, they won't break any of those details to you at all until essentially the police investigation has run its course, and once they know from people like the Forensic Science Service exactly what went on, you really don't know too much of what has happened. Not even to the point of how he died. We didn't know how he died until about 9 o'clock that night. And brethren and sisters and young people, at 6 o'clock that evening was the last time that I saw my brother. We were asked to go and identify his body. And it was the most weird experience. You know, we talk about trials this weekend. It was the most bizarre experience that I have ever endured. There he was, laid out in a mortuary at the age of 45, without life. And one of the hardest things for me, he had been an alcoholic for many years prior to that. I had never quite realized until he lived with Sister Elizabeth and I for about 3 months what a terrible disease alcoholism is. And the hardest thing during that entire process was knowing that he had never accepted the truth. But our subject here is not really about him. It's about evil and violence in the world. There are children here, so don't worry. I'm not going to, delve into any of the details surrounding his death. But the guy that did it, Corey Thomas, was an 18-year-old boy. He was out on license from a juvenile young offenders institution where he had been put away for threatening one of the local policemen with a knife. So on good behavior, he was allowed to roam the streets. Now, there were many blessings, even despite those horrible times. The police inspector leading the investigation said that he had never seen a case go through the courts so quickly and where he was sentenced. So he was sentenced in the early part of June. So within 6 months, the whole court case, the whole process had come to an end. But on that day, in early June, when we went to Cardiff Crown Court, and the Crown Prosecution Service read out the person's offences, I mean, you could have been there all day. He had been involved with the police for scissors crime, for knife crime. He had beaten his grandmother at one stage. Here's an 18-year-old boy, walking the streets, and the violence that he, poured out that evening was genuinely. You could hardly sit in court and listen to the events that happened over a 5-10 minute period on that evening. He was sentenced to life, but with a minimum tariff of 10 years. He was 19 when he was sentenced in June, so by the time the boy is 29 years of age, he can be out walking the streets again to do probably the same thing all over again. And when we think of evil in the world, let us consider that crime is increasing today at an alarming rate. I mean, as I was growing up, probably if somebody was murdered, they were living in Bristol where Bro.Steve was living. Not that Bro.Steve Armstrong was responsible, but I mean, you had to live in a big city in the UK, really, to hear of that kind of violence. Somewhere like Manchester or somewhere like London. Today it really is on our doorstep, and it is getting out of control. A few years ago in Manchester in northern England, there was an 11-year-old boy who had been having a kick around with his friends playing soccer, who was shot dead at the age of 11. He was simply walking home from a local football club where he ended up in the wrong place at the wrong time and got caught up in crossfire between rival gangs, and his life ended by a gang member who was just 15 at the time. Take as another example the unsolved murder of another man just outside of Manchester, who was shot dead in front of 30 people in a bar. And yet, despite significant rewards on offer for information, this was a crowded bar. A crowded bar. They knew he was a local man. They knew exactly who it was. And yet, despite huge rewards, nobody has identified him to this day. And the coroner, in the court case just a couple of months ago, said, lots of people know what happened and who was responsible, but those people are not giving evidence because they are frightened. Addressing the victim's mother, she added, I understand fear. I am sure that you can too. But we would both also salute courage. Is it not frightening that someone can be brutally killed in a room full of people and no one has come forward to give evidence to bring the perpetrator of the crime to justice? She said, is that not frightening? I can understand fear for one's own safety and one's family and one's children. But it is frightening to live in a society, she says, where someone can be brutally killed and no one is brought to justice. On a larger scale, consider the evil actions of the Boston bombers. Or consider Adam Lanza, who killed 26 people in Sandy Hook School in Connecticut. Or the Batman killer, James Holmes, who killed 12 people in a cinema in Colorado. Or the Norwegian gunman, Anders Breivik, who killed 77 people. And the list truly goes on and on. Despite unparalleled affluence, dissatisfaction in the world today is rife. Suicide is on the increase. In the USA, a suicide is committed just under every half an hour, with 4 unsuccessful attempts taking place at the same time. These statistics are from a few years ago, and I would guess, with the credit crunch, the numbers would be higher now. In every country, violence on the roads and in airports are attaining to new records. Let's go to Romans 1. For the invisible things of him from the creation of the world are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. Because that when they knew God, they glorified him not as God, neither were thankful, but became vain in their imaginations, and their foolish heart was darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools, and changed the glory of the uncorruptible God into an image made like to corruptible man, and to birds and four-footed beasts and creeping things. Wherefore God also gave them up to uncleanness through the lusts of their own hearts, to dishonour their own bodies between themselves, who changed the truth of God into a lie, and worshipped and served the creature more than the Creator, who is blessed forever. For this cause God gave them up into vile affections, for even their women did change the natural use into that which is against nature. And the list goes on, being filled with all unrighteousness, fornication, wickedness, covetousness, etc. Without understanding, without natural affection, who knowing the judgment of God, that they which commit such things are worthy of death, not only do the same, but have pleasure in them that do them. This chapter almost sums up the vast majority of the evil on the internet, that is the World Wide Web today. The people behind its design were indeed behind the invention of one of the most evil things that exists today. So much so that when a software company went into China, China said, yes, please, but much of it would have to be censored. Despite Google saying previously that they had very little control, they were able to censor the internet almost overnight for China. China will squash any plans of any kinds of protests and wanted to censor all of that. These companies could clean up the internet overnight. They could protect children, but it wouldn't be good for business, and so they don't. Just quickly, we mentioned disobedience to parents as a sign from 2 Timothy chapter 3. Children today can be disobedient because parents, school teachers, schools have no right to discipline. So what we have is a society full of disobedient children, and we wonder why. If you smack a child and cause any redness on the skin in the UK, a parent can now be prosecuted and their children put into foster care. Again, Sister Esther and Sister Elizabeth MacLeod were telling us just a few weeks ago how teachers and preschool centres now have a responsibility to report to the authorities any kind of marks they see on their pupils. I remember when the anti-smacking law first came in, and a government official tried to make out that this wasn't a ban on smacking, but the interviewer gently slapped his wrist to show how easy it was to make a red mark. One of the signs we are to look for is disobedience to parents, and we see it today on an unimaginable scale. Revelation 11:15, and the nations were angry, and thy wrath is come, and the time of the dead that they should be judged, that thou shouldest give reward unto thy servants the prophets and to the saints, and them that fear thy name, small and great, and shouldest destroy them which destroy the earth. Yes, there is wickedness in the earth, and God says that to those who are morally corrupt, they will be destroyed, for they have destroyed the earth. Come with me just briefly as we bring our remarks to a close in the next few minutes to Galatians chapter 5. Here there is a list of the works of the flesh. And again, if we ask ourselves the question today, do we see these absolutely rampant throughout the world? We would say yes to almost all of the sightings here. So that's Galatians 5, verse 16. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lust of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh, and these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. But if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revellings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. I'd like to have a look at Daniel chapter 12, just to finish off this section. Daniel says that at that time shall one like Ale stand up, the great prince which standeth for the children of thy people, and there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation even to that same time.